this week and next week. Next week, obviously, being Easter, we're breaking away from our the foundation study that we've been going through, just to take a moment just to consider more in depth the things for like this season that we celebrate. So this is kind of a part one this week, part two next week. But if you're there, Luke chapter 23, we're going to be reading verses 44 through 56. So Luke 23, starting in verse 44, it says, "Now it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over all of the earth until the 9th hour. Then the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, 'Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.' Having said this, he breathed his last. So when the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, 'Certainly this was a righteous man.' And the whole crowd who came together to that sight, seeing what had been done, beat their breasts and returned. But all of his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance, watching these things. Now behold, there was a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and just man. He had not consented to their decision indeed. He was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who himself was also waiting for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb that was hewn out of the rock, where no one had ever lain before. That day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew near. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment." Now, leading up to this, if anyone at all is unaware, this is talking about the moment after, Jesus has been hanging on the cross. And so this was after the beatings, the humiliation, the everything that they put him through to get him to the Mount of Golgotha, or Calvary as we call it, where Jesus was hung on a cross for our sins. All of that led up to this moment. We kind of picked up when he's kind of in the final moments of him hanging on the cross, and when he willfully gives up his life, he breathes his last. That's kind of where we picked up here. But again, this is kind of part one of where we're going to be over the next 2 weeks. And because when we talk about Easter, most of us probably already know how the story ends. That's pivotal in the gospel. And so it's not exactly a problem that we understand how the story ends. I'm glad that we know the truth of it. But a lot of times when we come to this time of year, we jump straight to the empty tomb. We jump straight to the angel speaking to the women. We jump straight to the "he is risen" moment of the story. And because we do that, I think sometimes maybe we haven't paid enough attention to all of the rest of what's going on in this story. There's a day in the Easter story that I don't think we really consider at all most of the time. It's not the Friday in the story, because Friday was the day that they nailed Jesus to the cross. That's Good Friday. That's this coming Friday, where we celebrate Good Friday. We oftentimes recognize and stop and reflect on Good Friday. And it's obviously not Sunday, because Sunday is the day we come together to celebrate Easter or Resurrection Sunday. But the day that we often don't ever hit on or talk about is the Saturday. There's a Saturday in the story. There's Friday where he's nailed to a cross. There's a Saturday, and then there's Sunday when he rises again. But Saturday is the day after the cross. Like I said, it's the day before the empty tomb. It's the day when the people who loved Jesus had to sit there, not really knowing, or maybe even believing that the resurrection was possible. Jesus had told them that he was going to rise from the dead. But think about the place that they were in. Yeah, I think sometimes we kind of just read this as a storybook and we don't stop to consider like these were real people sitting there in this moment. But think about that day. Again, Jesus told them he was going to rise. But if we were in the place that they were in, if I had just watched Jesus nailed to a cross hours ago, if I just watched him a few hours ago breathe his last, if that had just happened a few hours ago like it had for these people, would we be in a place where we'd be like, oh yeah, I can't wait for what happens next? Or would we be like struggling from the grief of the moment? Like, I just saw him hang on a cross, bleed, die, suffer, everything hours ago. Will we be struggling with the grief of the moment and not sure what the future held in that moment? It's probably like, I like to just, I don't know, I always think about the little like bunny trails that you could get on some of these. Like, if you could sit down with the disciples and ask some questions, I'm sure like we'd immediately want to be like, well, what about the miracles that he performed? What about sitting there watching him teach? What about all those 3 years that you walked with him day after day? But I think it would be so interesting to ask them, what was that Saturday like? The day where you watched him die the day before. Then you had to sit there for a day. Like, before anything else happened. Like, what was that day like? The day before you really knew it was possible for him to come back to life. Like, what did you do? Like, what were you guys saying to each other? Like, were you able to sleep? Like, being that you just watched Jesus die. Between Jesus' last breath on the cross and him walking out of the tomb, there is an entire day where nothing really happens. There's no miracles, there's no angels, there's no voices from heaven. There's likely just grief and confusion. There's people trying to figure out what to do now. They're trying to figure out what to do because the person that they have been building their life around, they watched him die yesterday. I think these people were going through it in this moment. And I think the reality of what they're going through in this day can teach us a lot about, I think, the circumstances that we find ourselves going through. Like this Saturday, again, like we don't recognize it that much, but this Saturday is like the perfect example of the middle ground between what God has accomplished and us actually seeing it come to fruition. Like it's the perfect example of like God has done something, but I haven't seen it happen yet. And they're right in the middle of that. We've all lived through those middle ground moments, but before we like really kind of, get the application element of it, we reflect on this Friday still. When we were looking at these verses, we look at what we just read, Luke tells us, when we started at verse 44, Luke told us that it was the 6th hour when this part of the passage is that we started reading. Now, their clock was a little bit different than ours on how they counted time. The 6th hour in the culture at that time was noon. Like their day started at 6 a.m. approximately our time. So the 6th hour of the day would have been noon. It would have been the dead middle of the day. And being the middle of the day, like the sun should be at its highest and brightest place at that time of day. But instead, like Luke says there was darkness over all of the earth from the 6th to the 9th hour. So from 12 noon to about 3 p.m., the earth was dark. I know I, for one, if I wasn't in the midst of this whole situation and I was just somewhere else during this time and like, okay, like why is the earth dark? For 3 hours in the middle of the day, it's not supposed to be dark. That would be concerning. Obviously, we don't know exactly what God did to cause the darkness at this moment, but it wasn't just like some clouds rolling in. It wasn't just like cloud cover came in and darkened the sky. It says here that the very sun was darkened. And I've heard different ways that this is described. And, when you look at like what's happening in this moment, like this darkness that they're experiencing is like the very creation reacting to what is happening on the cross. Because what is Jesus called? One of his names is light of the world. light of the world was dying on that cross, and the earth went dark at the same time. It's like creation was responding to the truth of the cross. But imagine being there in that moment. You're standing at a distance. That's where we find like Jesus' friends and acquaintances and the women here in this passage. They're standing at a distance. It says in verse 49 that all of his acquaintances, the women who followed him from Galilee, they stood at a distance. They were watching these things. They were close enough to see it all happen, but they're not really close enough to do anything about this. But what could they do? Like they're watching this happen to Jesus. But what could they do? Like there's Roman soldiers performing the crucifixion. Like they're not going to win against these trained Roman army soldiers that are performing this crucifixion. But if you put yourself in their shoes, like they don't know the Easter story as we know it when they're standing there watching it unfold. What they're watching is the man that they believe to be the Messiah, the one that they left everything to follow, dying a criminal's death in the dark. That's what they're experiencing in that moment. Luke 45, or verse 45 of this passage, that's where Luke tells us that the sun was darkened, but he tells us that two things actually happened simultaneously. He says that the sun was darkened, but it says that at the same time, the veil of the temple was torn in two. We've talked about this a few times before, but when the temple was built in, they had this mass, like really thick, historically, it's like an extremely thick fabric veil that's in the temple that separated the holy place of the temple from the most holy place of the temple, which is where like the presence of God resided in the temple, where God came to visit with man. It was the dividing line between humanity and the direct presence of God. And for centuries, only the high priest once a year could cross through that veil with a sacrifice into the most holy place of the temple. And it was a serious business. Like you go and you look into the Old Testament and how all this went down. If the high priest walked into that room and he was in a bad place, he was in sin himself, he hadn't dealt with things before God, it says he would fall down dead when he walked through that veil. They would have a rope tied to his leg because if he walked in there and was not right before God, when he went into the presence of God, he would die and they would drag him out and then they would assign the next high priest. It's like that's how it worked. And so one person once a year went into the most holy place to bring the sacrifice before God. But we see in this moment, the sun was darkened, but it says the veil of the temple was torn. And what's crazy is in Matthew's gospel, Matthew is even clear. He says the veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom, which is an interesting piece of information that Matthew gives us. Again, this was like a massively thick curtain that no human's going to be like, I can rip this thing in half. But again, a human would be likely ripping it from the bottom up. But Matthew is very clear in his significance. It says that thick veil in the temple that separated the presence of God from humanity was torn from top to bottom in a way that no human could accomplish. It was done like that because God tore it open. In the middle of what looks like the worst moment in human history, something is being accomplished that no one standing there watching from a distance can comprehend yet. The barrier is coming down. Access between God and man is being opened. Like it's crazy. They're watching him die on that cross in this moment, but even though they can't see it, like the sun's dark, they're watching Jesus die. God simultaneously in the temple's tearing down the barrier between him and humanity. Every sacrifice that has happened for thousands of years up to this point, every lamb that has been offered, every day of atonement that they had, all of it was being pointed towards this moment where the perfect sacrifice was being made. But again, when I think of the humanity that's standing there from a distance, these people weren't aware or weren't really seeing all of this firsthand yet the way that we are now that we're seeing the whole picture. I think they just saw the person that they love dying in this moment. Verse 46 says Jesus cries out with a loud voice and says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. I want you to notice what Jesus says here, because again, if we know the truth of what's happening on that cross, Jesus is being literally crushed. Like he was, nailed to a cross by humans with, metal nails to a wooden cross. But so much worse than that was happening was that his Father was basically exercising judgment upon him for all of our sin that we've ever committed. It says that he was being crushed for our sin on that cross. That was so much, we don't even know what that's like. We have no idea. We have no comprehension of the spiritual anguish that he was going through on the cross, because yes, he was nailed to a wooden cross, but he was being crushed by God the Father for all of our sin as the sacrifice in our place. That is so much worse. But even in that moment, even as that's happening, he still calls God Father. There's no break in the relationship. He's being crushed for our sin by his Father, but he still calls out, "Father, into your hands." Jesus is willingly and voluntarily laying down his life. The person on the cross is not a victim that is being overpowered. This is the Son of God completing what he came to do. Humans could not overpower Jesus if he had not wanted this to happen. He walked this path all the way to the cross. He was not being overpowered by them. He was completing what he came to do. John's gospel records in this same moment that Jesus says, "It is finished." That the work is done, the price is paid, and that everything that needed to happen for you or for I to be saved happened right here in this moment. But again, in the humanity, I don't know if anybody stood there in that moment where it's like, yeah, it's all worked out. This is exactly what was supposed to happen. I think they were just experiencing the death of their friend Jesus. We see in verse 47 the response of a Roman soldier. There's a Roman centurion that's sitting there and he's experiencing this event. And this Roman soldier, he's a pagan. He's a man that's likely overseen dozens of crucifixions. He's probably been there through dozens of, who knows, more people killed. I know when there was the slave uprising in the Roman Empire, that when they were coming back from stopping the slave uprising, the history says that I think it was every 100 yards along this road for hundreds of miles or something like that, they crucified somebody. Thousands and thousands of people were crucified along the road as they marched back to Rome. A lot of these guys killed many, many people. So this guy has probably been involved in dozens of crucifixions, if not more. But when he sees Jesus die, it says that he glorifies God. He says, certainly this was a righteous man. Something about the way Jesus died shook this hardened soldier to his core. He didn't know all of our theological words that we talk about. He didn't know salvation and atonement or substitution or propitiation, all these, big theological words that we use. But he recognized something that he hadn't seen before when he voiced these words. He may have been a killer, but he saw righteousness in front of him in this moment. He was just coming to understand that. Verse 48 says the whole crowd that came together to that site, seeing what had been done, they beat their breasts as they were returning back from where they came from. That's kind of a crazy thing in this culture. This is a group of people that came for the spectacle. They came to watch somebody get killed. I would hate to, you would think oh, I think the world's changed. No, if they were still doing public executions right now, people would still go out to go watch. It's crazy. That's just human nature. People get crazy. But the crucifixions, they drew crowds and some crazy form of entertainment. But something happened at this one. Again, most of these people, they've probably seen plenty of crucifixions. They've probably seen plenty of people killed in different ways. But something happened here that caused these people to go home and says literally beating their chests from what they just experienced. I know they're experiencing grief or confusion. They came to watch a man die, but they left feeling that something much bigger had happened, and they didn't really know what it was yet. But the people who did know Jesus, the ones who followed him for 3 years, who heard every sermon, they saw every miracle, again in verse 49 it says that they're standing at a distance, just watching. Now it's all over. Jesus breathed his last. What happens next is kind of interesting. I think sometimes we move a little fast through the story. We kind of miss this guy in part of it too. But in verses 50 through 54, we see a man named Joseph. It says he's from a town called Arimathea. And Luke is careful to tell us who this man is. He says that he's a council member, which means that he's part of the Sanhedrin, which if we were to go back in the story, the Sanhedrin is the group of Jews that called for Jesus' death. They're the ones, they had an illegal trial. They called for Jesus' death based on false information and all of this stuff. But he's part of that group that called for Jesus' death and condemned Jesus to die. But Luke tells us about this guy. He says that he wasn't part of the consenting part of this group, that he did not consent to their decision to kill Jesus or the deed of actually killing him. It says Joseph was a dissenter. He was a man that quietly believed in Jesus, even though he was in a room full of people that absolutely did not. And now that Jesus is dead, Joseph does something that takes enormous courage. Joseph goes to Pilate. He asks for the body of Jesus. But think about what this means. Yeah, he's part of the Jewish, legal, like their kind of governing body. I think he was, part of that system. To publicly claim the body of someone that they just executed was to associate yourself with that person. It's like he was associating himself with Jesus by can I take possession of his body to bury him? Every one of his colleagues in the Sanhedrin, they would know about it. Obviously, he was approaching the Roman government, so Pilate was going to know about all these things. And if you think about his situation, Joseph was stepping out of the shadows to claim, really be a follower of Jesus at the worst time possible. There's no benefits for him really in this moment. He walks forward when it looks like everything's lost because Jesus just died. There's no strategic advantage of this moment. There's no, he's not riding in on a wave of popularity that Jesus had. There's just a dead teacher at this moment that he has an empty tomb that they can take him to. But there's something about Joseph's story that I think should challenge us. Because if we look at what Joseph's doing here, it's easy to identify with Jesus when everything's going well and people are comfortable with him around you. It's easy to be bold with your faith when there's momentum, oh yeah, everybody's good with this. I can be bold for Jesus now. But Joseph showed up when the evidence said, this is kind of over. He's dead on a cross. When everything looked kind of bleak, Joseph stepped in. So when we talk about the Saturday between today, that's a Saturday between kind of faith. You're in the middle, something just happened. We haven't seen the good results yet, but we're in the middle of it. So he's still stepping forward when it's hard. He's acting when it costs him something. He's stepping forward when stepping back would be a lot easier. And you think about even what he was doing. He goes and he takes the body of Jesus down from the cross. They wrap the body in linen. They lay it in a tomb that was cut out of the rock. And when you think about, again, the humanity of this, someone had to take the nails out of Jesus's body. Someone had to take the weight of Jesus' body as they're taking him down off of the cross. Someone was having to clean the blood off of his body as they were preparing him for burial. They had to wrap linen carefully around the man that they believed to be the hope of the world, and yet they're taking his body down, cleaning the blood off of him. Again, humanity-wise, that had to be some real kind of heartbreaking, difficult moments to go through. Verse 54 says that this was the day of preparation and the Sabbath drew near. The Sabbath drawing near means that time was running out for them to get things done. The sun was setting, and once it sets, the Sabbath begins. And by their law, once the Sabbath begins, no more work can be done. So they're probably rushing. They're trying to get everything done. They're trying to get Jesus taken care of. But things are still unfinished. We get to verses 55 and 56. It says, the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how the body was laid, and they returned and they prepared spices and fragrant oils. Again, all of these women were with Jesus throughout his ministry. They watched the crucifixion. They followed the body to the tomb. They watched it be laid inside. And now they're going home to prepare, in their culture, like the burial spices and oils to treat the body with. They know that they can't save him. They can't change what happened. They can't undo what happened on the Friday before the Saturday. But what they can do now is they can just try to honor him. Like they're trying to honor him. So they prepare what they can. And they get ready to come back when the Sabbath is over and do what they do because they loved him. I said through all of these things, like all of these people and what they're going through, I don't think we talk about it much, but I think it's easy to see the real humanity of all of these situations. Like, we think about our own situations, like they're in a place where they can't fix something and they're just trying to do what they can. For us, I think we all experience a lot of situations where maybe we can't fix them in the moment, but what can we do? What's the next faithful step I can do to still do something in this moment? For us, as people, maybe it's when we see each other in difficulty, again, they just saw Jesus die. All of their friends are grieving and weeping. But for us, maybe it's taking a meal to a grieving family. You can't change what happened to them. You can't change what they went through, but you can still be there for them. You can still, hopefully provide some comfort in that way. Maybe it's just showing up for a friend that's going through something, even though you don't have the words to tell them to get them out of the situation, but you could just be there for them. Maybe it's just things that you just keep praying through for people, the things that are difficult, but it's you can't solve it, but we're just taking it to the one who can. We're doing the next faithful thing that we can do in the moment, even if we can't see the solution to everything. It's just, what's the next faithful step I can do to be there for my brother and sister and do the right thing before the Lord? You see, I think, the love that they had, because real love, even when it can't solve the problem, real love does what it can do, even if it can't do everything it wants to do. Real love just steps up to the plate. These ladies, these women, they're not passive. Like I said, they're not pretending they can control all of it. They're just trying to get to work in the middle of a hard situation. We see them preparing spices and oils. But in the middle of all of their rush to try to honor Jesus, it says at the end of verse 56 that they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. They're in the middle of trying to, Jesus just died. They're in the middle of trying to prepare the body. This is all in the same afternoon and evening. That's what's crazy. This is Friday. This isn't over a period of time. This is, Jesus died that Friday, throughout that afternoon and that evening. They're rushing to try to get the body taken care of, get him cleaned up, prepared, get him into the tomb. This isn't over a period of time. This is over a period of hours. That they're trying to take care of all of these things. But they know that coming sundown, it's going to be the Sabbath. And by law, by God's law, they're not supposed to do anything at that point. It says they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. On what was probably the worst day of their lives, it says that they still, by God's command, rested. The Sabbath required them to stop working and be still. And so the women who had just watched their Lord die, who had just prepared the spices to anoint his broken body, they had to stop because God said to rest. And they obeyed, even in the middle of all of the things that they were going through. So I don't know if you've ever considered this, Saturday, like we're talking about, and the people and the things that they were going through. If you've grown up hearing the Easter story, we might not think much about the Saturday. We rush past it. We rush to the good part. We know how it ends. But the people that were going through it, they didn't have that option. Like they can't skip to a story that's the story is being written. It's like they're living through the circumstances. For them, they were living through a day, which again, if you think about the reality, they were living through a day where like hope died. Like that's kind of a crazy place to be where, for that period of time, Jesus was dead. You even think about in some of Luke's other writing, in some of the Gospels, like you see some of the hearts of some of these, like they honestly, a lot of these people believed in Jesus' death that all of this hope was now past tense. Like they believed Jesus was the Messiah. And a lot of these were written in past tense. They believed he was going to redeem Israel at this point, past tense. Luke, when he talks about the story of the road to Emmaus, where it's crazy because there's this point where Jesus is risen from the dead and and Jesus meets with some of his disciples or some of his followers that were leaving the area after they watched him die. Jesus meets with them, but he, in some supernatural way, obscures his identity from him. They don't know that it's him. And Jesus is having a conversation with these people as they're leaving the area after watching him. And they tell him, we believed that he was going to be the one to redeem these people. We believed that he was going to be the one to save us. They were telling all these things to Jesus, and they were telling it in the past tense. Like we believed he was, but now he's dead. That's where all of these people are at right now. It said, as they sat there that day, there was no voice from heaven to explain the situation. There was silence that day. It was a day of rest. The same God who spoke the universe into existence, the same God who spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, the same God who sent fire from heaven when Elijah called upon it, that same God on this day, he wasn't letting them know anything. It was a day to just sit and rest and wait and see what he was going to do. And I think it's so important for us to understand that today, because they were in this moment of silence between death and resurrection. But silence doesn't mean that God isn't working. Because in their situation, even when they're sitting there on that Saturday in a terrible place, even on that Saturday, God had already accomplished everything that he needed to do to save them. The sacrifice had already been made. The work was finished before the tomb was sealed, but the people who loved Jesus, they just couldn't see it yet. They were in the middle. All they had was silence and a commandment to rest. So I look at this and I say, I think some of us, and we talked about this kind of when we started the year this year, but I think some of us might be living in a Saturday of our own in some ways. Like we're between the moment where something has happened and we haven't seen the end yet. We haven't seen how it all works out yet. We're kind of just in the middle. For some, maybe it's, maybe we've gone through marriage difficulties and we're just praying and praying and praying and we haven't seen God, work it all out yet. Maybe we've had kids that, we want to see better for them and, we're praying for them and they've gone astray and we're just, God, please bring them back. Maybe we've had struggles of our own faith. Like you think you believe, but you're struggling with the word and in prayer and your relationship with him. Maybe you're scared to admit that because people are going to think something's wrong with you. But we all go through this. Like the Saturdays, the Saturday in these people's lives was very real. But there's Saturdays in our life that are very real too. There's those moments where we're between the problem and the solution. And I'm not going to stand up here and say that you need to rush past it. Like these people didn't get to rush past it. They had to live through it. And they had to live through it on a day where they were told not to do anything. They were told to just sit, to not work that day, to rest and focus on God. The disciples didn't get to skip it, and neither do we sometimes. But though for us, yes, those Saturday moments are real, those in-between moments are real, but just for these people and for us too, Saturday wasn't the end of the story. Friday wasn't the end of the story. Saturday wasn't the end of the story. The cross had accomplished everything. The price was already paid. Their Saturday didn't undo what happened on Friday. And the things that we go through doesn't undo what God has already done for us as well. What should we do when we find ourselves in moments like these women? What should you do when you're in that moment in between? Again, you haven't seen the light at the end of the tunnel yet. I think we do what these women do. Like, you stay close. You prepare what you can. You do the next faithful thing that you can on God's terms. You obey what you know to be true, even though it maybe doesn't feel like it's going to accomplish anything in this moment. And maybe even as they had to, you just rest because there's nothing you can do besides lay it at the feet of God. And hopefully we trust Him more than we trust our own feelings and perspectives on things. That some of us may be in that same sort of place. What God has done is already sufficient. What Christ has accomplished is already complete. We find ourselves living in that Saturday moment that's between the promise and the fulfillment, and we're just struggling to see the other side. But for them, and for us too, again, like we just said a minute ago, Saturday was not the end of the story, because we get to next week and we get to celebrate what came for them that next morning. Like, they lived through probably the worst day of their lives. God had already done what they needed. They couldn't see it yet. They lived through the worst day of their lives, and then they came the next morning and they got to see, look what God is capable of. But they had to go through the process of it. They had to live through the difficulty. Like I said, Saturday is not the end of the story, but if it's where we're at right now, sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is sit down on Saturday and trust that the same God who tore that veil from top to bottom to have a relationship with us is not done yet. And He's got a plan to work it out. I think so many times we get caught up in our heads and in doing every other last thing that we don't sit down and just get back to the place of just trusting the God that carried these people through to the next day that they needed to get to. That's what we need sometimes. Like, we're going 1,000 miles a minute in every other direction trying to find our own solution. It's like we got to just stop and rest in Him.